what, you guys hold the fort down there. This will be here.
They'll say.
Welcome everybody. Can you hear me? I'm gonna try without a mic.
We can hear you.
That is great. What a lovely crowd, and everyone here has made this the best night possible because you've taken time away from your own deadlines in life to be with us for a night that's all about Anne McCormick. She's a remarkable reporter and one of the first women to win a Pulitzer. She won it for foreign correspondence. Okay, foreign correspondence in 1937. And Anne is still with us today because we have some former McCormick Scholarship winners who've gone on to great careers who are with us here tonight. And we have 3 young winners in the class of 2014. And I'd like for those women, they're the new faces and voices of Anne, to come up now so you can see who they are. Each of them won a $5,000 McCormick scholarship, and Betsy Wade has a little extra for them because it's a historic. They've already cashed the check.
This is from your trustees.
This actually has a historic link to Betsy, and I think every woman here who has a real career in the news and cashes a real paycheck instead of having to do wedding write-ups owes a big debt to Betsy. And even when I have a bad day in the office, which is rare, but I say I owe it to Betsy because she's a strong woman and she blazed the trail. So our winners tonight, the first is Patricia Guerra, and she comes to us by way of California and Mexico. She impressed the trustees because she is a reporter who loves to dig into a story and be daring. She did some reporting on a politician in Mexico for Univision. She did reporting on immigration, and she was part of a team that won an Emmy before she even arrived at the journalism school. And now she's been working on covering public housing in Harlem. Her thesis is about, includes the story of a transgender woman who wanted to go have her remains buried back in her home area in Mexico. So we expect great things. Patty Guerra. And she received the McCormick that was given in honor of the feisty Edith Evans Asbury, who never did shrink from a difficult story or, a difference of opinion in the newsroom.
Oh,
Never. In the center is Julia Harte, and she went to Turkey of all places. She had this incredible curiosity about Turkey, wanted to go there as a freelancer, not being supported by a big news organization, but to go as a freelancer. Some of her work there appeared this February on the Daily News online section of National Geographic, including some of her photography. But when we saw Julia's application, we thought, here's someone who wants to cover the world. She dug in and learned the language while she was there, and she's a Stabile Fellow. She got a pass from Professor Sheila Coronel to be here and be honored tonight. Julia received the McCormick Scholarship given in honor of Guinevere Bryan Hall, who's a past president of the Newswomen's Club of New York. And the Newswomen's Club of New York is part of Anne's professional friends and family. It's the New York Times, it's the Newswomen's Club who founded the McCormick Fund, and so to Julia and to Gwen. Annie Wu is fluent in Mandarin, Cantonese, English, and she loves to write and report in ways that show the multicultural aspects right here in New York. And her thesis is on gambling addiction in Chinatown. And she dug into that topic, got people to talk to her. They didn't want to talk because of the cultural stigma of gambling, but she got them to talk. And Annie is quiet, but her writing, her reporting and her writing just blew us away when we were going through the applications. And so she won the McCormick Scholarship named after Joan O'Sullivan, who was the longtime president of the McCormick Fund. And we have Joan's daughter, Mitra Kalita, here tonight. And yeah. Yeah, she did. She did. So we have a lovely contingent of trustees of the McCormick Fund on the front row and scattered throughout the crowd. You want to stand? As we didn't do this except as a group. I'd like for you to... It's a group. It's a friends and family. And then I would like the Newswomen's Club members. We have some past presidents and board members. If you could stand, please, so we can see the network. So it's not just a scholarship, it's a networking of mentoring and lifelong relationships. They get money and they get the mentoring and they can reach out through a lifetime. And now we are developing a database of more than 140 women have won McCormick scholarships in the 60 years since the fund was started. It's quite a network. So I'm going to turn it over to Betsy now and she'll bring Gail.
Congratulations to all three of you. We're so happy to be here with you tonight. You ought to be able to sit down. I get the job, it's the no-job job. I'm introducing Gail Collins. If you don't know Gail Collins, you've come to the wrong party. And here she is, and she will introduce her panel.
Thank you. Does this thing work? Wow. It's always so embarrassing. I have to keep moving things down for me. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We're very excited about this panel. I'm so excited to share stories with my fellow panelists tonight. As I call you, come right up and take a seat. Caryl Rivers. Caryl is a well-known, best-selling author, a distinguished journalist, the author of 14 books, including Virgins, which is just so hilarious, and the brand new The Soft War on Women, How the Myth of Female Ascendancy is Hurting Women, Men, and Our Economy. And I should also say that, like everybody tonight, she has worked for 1 trillion places. You know, there was a time when you'd introduce people and you would just say, well, they worked here, and then they went there, and they had 25 wonderful years, and that's it. But she started in Washington in a small newspaper, worked for the Washington Post, Times Magazine, Ms., many, many more. She's the winner of the Helen Thomas Lifetime Achievement Award. Mitra, where is Mitra? Come on up, Mitra. Mitra Kalita is the ideas editor at Quartz, which, as I think many of you know, covers the global economy. And I read one of her resumes before I came in here tonight, and it said that she speaks 7 languages, but only 4 of them really well. So I think this is a modest woman. She is the author of 3 books, most recently My Two Indias. She's worked for the Wall Street Journal, where she helped launch the Greater New York section, the Washington Post, Newsday, and the Associated Press. She also launched Mint, a business paper in New Delhi. Fantastic. Welcome, Danielle Douglas is a person who knows how to do a whole bunch of stuff. She has written, how do you write simultaneously for the New York Sun and the Amsterdam News? That seems so
They're diametrically opposed.
And let's see, she was the managing editor of a trade magazine for commercial real estate. She's covered the retail and hospitality industry for Capital Business, and she now covers the banking industry for the Washington Post and has promised to have explained to us how you cover bankers in this world today when you're a woman. That's our panel. We're going to talk for a little while and you can have questions. Welcome, everybody. Okay, who wants to start? And do we need these, do you think?
Yes.
We do, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Pull forward, ladies, your microphones. You want to pass them around? How do we feel about it? We can do that.
Oh, we each have one.
We've each got one now, so we're
Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
We're well mic'd, thank you very much. So I want to start with, Daniel, tell your story, how you got to where you are now and how you cover banking as a woman. It seems
Sure.
fascinating.
So I actually started out covering the politics in New York for a community newspaper out in Brooklyn called Our Time Press, which was a fantastic start. It was a family paper, and they treated all of their reporters as family. And I was able to actually end up at a trade publication called Real Estate Forum covering commercial real estate, which was also really exciting, even though it sounds a little boring at times. But it was a great education in how to maneuver in the business world, especially as a young woman. There weren't many other women at the time covering, at least in our particular niche, covering CDOs and some of the more exotic financial instruments. So it was a great time to be there. And then from there, I ended up coming to this fantastic institution and was able to learn a lot more about how to tell a story. And luckily, that landed me at the Post, which has been a great experience. I mean, it's interesting covering banking. Bankers tend to carry a lot of bravado. And at first, culturally, it just wasn't something I was very comfortable with. My family's from the Caribbean, and it's not normal to just kind of assert yourself in very formal settings. And so I had to get comfortable with that. But I realized, and I was telling Gail this earlier, just kind of walking into the room with this level of confidence made it a lot easier to cover Jamie Dimon and talk to him and ask him tough questions head on.
How well did he respond to that? Is it?
Oh, not so well the first time. But after a while, I think he started to respect that I understood what was going on, and I didn't have an agenda. I just honestly wanted to get to the truth of the story, and we learned to respect each other after a while. I think he's really happy that Bank of America is now in the hot seat, so our relationship has gotten better as a result. But it's a beautiful thing to cover business, especially right now. There's so many rich stories to be told, whether it's consumer finance or it's actual policy. And I think one of the best things is that Columbia gave me a grounded foundation to be able to do that. And thanks to the McCormick Scholarship, I was able to actually afford to go to Columbia and do that.
I think everybody went to Columbia, right? Is that you're all
Indeed.
grads here? I was a Badgett, so I was sort of halfway here at least. I think I count as that, but congratulations. But tell us your story, Mitra.
So I actually came into journalism from a real movement to get people like me in there. So it's probably the most contrived story you'll hear, where I was 16 years old and my journalism advisor on the school newspaper said, "There's a minorities journalism workshop this summer and I'd like to put your name in for it." And I said, "I don't think I'm a minority." And which gives you a sense of how clueless I was in suburban New Jersey. And also that I had no sense of newsrooms at the time, because indeed I was a minority. And so I did a program sponsored by the Dow Jones Newspaper Fund. I went to this boot camp for 2 weeks where they essentially brainwash you to become a journalist. And so people who tell me they fell into it or it happened accidentally or they found themselves writing a story. I mean, in my case, I was literally brought to a college campus. I was told, here is how you become a journalist. You do summer internships, you network your ass off, you are going to do this, 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 and this, and you will be successful, and we will will it to be so. And I had amazing people that cared about me without even knowing who I was, and that's kind of how it happened. Now, the formula was broken in my mid-20s when, and I was just telling Gail this, I was at the Washington Post. I was writing page one stories for the Washington Post, and I got pregnant unexpectedly. And so all of my career ladder at that point, just like that was not in the plan, right? It was supposed to happen later. And so everything kind of, you know, when you're brought into journalism formulaically and something happens that's not in the formula, I just ripped it up even more and was interviewing at the New York Times for a job and was recruited by a no-name startup in New Delhi to launch a business paper. And everybody told me, of course, you take the New York Times. But something about having been so programmed just made me rebel. And I found myself on a plane with my 2-year-old and my husband, and we launched this newspaper in India that went on to be called Mint. And now working for Quartz, I've kind of formed this like habit of quirky startup journalism names that I gravitate towards. But we could talk more about that later. But that's kind of the original story.
You know, Mitra was telling me that when she decided to go to India and turn down the Times, that the woman who offered her the job was Trish Hall, who's now the op-ed. What was she then? Was she?
She was the editor of Real Estate, Home, in the lifestyle sections.
And she said, I know this is stupid, I'm turning down the Times. And Trish said, no, it's great to do something really stupid. I once went and did this really stupid thing and went to work for this really stupid, crazy place. That was my place that she was talking about. So, and she said that before. So, but tell me, Caryl, about the book. I think that we'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, this is the new soft war on women, and I've have a long association with Dr. Rosalind Barnett at Brandeis, who is a psychologist, and we looked at dozens, hundreds of studies for this book, and basically found out that we call it the new soft war on women because there's no in-your-face stuff anymore. Nobody says, I won't hire you because you're a woman. But we found a lot of disturbing evidence that there's still lots of discrimination out there that women face, and we can talk about it a little later if we want. But the fact is that women are losing out. The higher up you go, women are basically stalling out. And a lot of it is this discrimination, which is inside our heads, men's and women's heads. And I think a lot of people don't know it's there, and it's very hard to cope with it. Because, for example, when men and women work together on a team, the man automatically gets the credit, even if the woman was the senior person, did all the work, and and invented the whole project. And we heard this story time and time again from women, and it's frustrating because you don't know how to say, what do you do? He's not saying, they're saying we don't want you. That's just saying he did it better than you. And it's these kinds of issues which we found again and again and again.
In journalism or just in general? In all
areas of work. We did talk to a lot of journalists, but it's also in all areas of work that we found that to be true.
I want to relinquish all responsibility at this point. I'm exhausted. We're going to take turns asking each other questions now, and I'm going to go back and start with Danielle. And then you can flip it to somebody else.
Sure. So I'd like to hear from all of you ladies kind of your experience in navigating your career as well as in the newsroom. I mean, you've all been at legacy establishment papers, and you've all gone off and done things to advance your own desire to be a part of journalism. Tell me a little bit about how you've been able to do that.
So the legacy thing is interesting because so when you get into journalism and somebody wills it to be so, that's what you're aspiring for. You're aspiring for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And I keep falling into startups within large news organizations, I think, which has everything to do with me being a woman and having 2 children and needing to be in an environment where my individual contribution is recognized and known, but we're small enough that it's really known. It's not masked by being a cog in a really large organization, and nobody's really sure whether if you're working from home, are you really working or are you at Children's Place buying your kids' underwear today? Which actually does happen sometimes when I'm working from home, right? But in a startup, I feel like, kind of my USP, if you will, to use marketing speak, my kind of unique selling point in the newsroom has been this ability to always be on. And I just accepted that. And again, I got pregnant completely unplanned, unexpectedly, and then my second child took forever to conceive. So just once I'd like to get pregnant when I want to get pregnant, but it doesn't work that way. And so I feel like me fluttering in and out of, even when I was at the Wall Street Journal, which is a really large legacy news organization, I gravitated toward launching the New York section because it felt like something that had a mission, which was not just let's like sock it to the New York Times. Well, that was a big part of the mission. But really like mission pure in a way that I think, correct me if I'm wrong for the women in the room, but I think we gravitate towards that, and you would know this from covering, if you ask women like why they're leaving Wall Street, and they're like, it just wasn't worth it anymore. Like we were sitting around the table and we were doing stupid things, and I was like, you know, I'm gonna do things that are really worth it, that like fuel my sense of idealism, fuel leaving this world a better place. I hate to sound so lofty, but I do hope that's the common thread of why we got into journalism. So I am gonna kind of turn that back on you and ask you for your thoughts on, also because you've been at like the New York Sun and the Amsterdam News, and is navigating that so different from a place like the Washington Post?
It's pretty different. I mean, it's a lot of, there's similar threads throughout all of these things, and just learning to assert yourself and have your voice heard, not only in your own work, but just generally within the newsroom. But I've never been in an organization quite the size of the Post, so it was definitely a culture shock. You know, at the community paper I was at in Brooklyn, we'd meet on a Saturday, have donuts, and talk about what we're going to do for the week, and start talking about folks in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. But at the Post, it's a different kind of learning how the politics works, how resources are distributed, and just a little bit of that. But what I think is really beautiful about the place that I hadn't had anywhere else is the level of camaraderie among the women. The fact that there are a lot of women of all ages that are willing to mentor you. I'd never experienced that. And the fact that they're not only just willing to mentor you and let's just talk about things that we're not too happy about it, but let's do something about it, and let's figure out a way or paths in order to affect some kind of change, not only in our lives, but make sure that it's a kind of environment that younger women feel comfortable saying their piece and having it heard. And that's an amazing thing to be a part of. And I only hope that at some point when there is a younger journalist who is looking for any guidance, I can provide that for her.
I think when I tell my journalism students, I was one of the girls in the balcony. When I finished at Columbia, I went to Washington. And at the time, the National Press Club would not allow women to cover speakers from the floor. We had to go to a balcony where there was no place to sit and all the TV equipment was stored. So I had an assignment to do a profile on Caryl Rivers, who was the first black head of USIA for the Washington Star. So I marched right in and I said, I'm not going to obey this cockamamie rule. I'm going to just march in and be with my source. Well, two guys physically grabbed me by both arms and marched me physically up the stairs. And my first aha moment at the famous feminist awakening was Caryl Rivers was talking, and all these sort of white male, very liberal reporters were taking notes. And he said, when I grew up in Minville, Tennessee, I couldn't go to the movies and sit on the floor. I had to sit in the balcony. And all of a sudden, the heavens opened up and I said, guess what? And I think that's what led for a lot of my coverage of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and then the women's movement, which struck with such incredible force. I mean, men basically thought, they were surprised as if sort of an army of ducks had marched in and made demands. Mm-hmm. It was stunning how people laughed at women, how we were not taken seriously, and how we had to really struggle for sort of every step we made. And it took a long time, but I think when I talk to my students about the way things were, and when I say there's still a lot of discrimination out there, they sort of sometimes tend not to believe it. But I say, yes, things have changed, but there's still a lot of stuff out there. We know, for example, there's some interesting research showing that a man who is forceful and competent is automatically likable. A woman who is forceful and competent is automatically a bitch.
How do you change that in the newsroom?
I think we have to point out that these things are true, because I think a lot of people who are doing it and making these decisions are not doing it because they're biased or they're prejudiced. These stereotypes are in their heads. And Sheryl Sandberg said that at Facebook, one of the things that they did there was a woman manager was given an assessment saying, you're too aggressive. But the person who was her superior looked at this and went back to all the people who'd made these comments and said, would you say this if it were a man? And they said, no. So it didn't go into her record. So I think what we need to do is we have to say, these are things that are happening. You know, the male and female stereotypes are still rooted in our heads. And very often it's women who are making these judgments. Who's the first person often to say, oh boy, is my boss a bitch? And it's often a woman.
Well, I think it's interesting that everybody here has done a whole bunch of different things. And something that Mitra said that really caught me is it's often more fun to not do the thing that's the thing that you thought was the thing you were going to be trying to do when you got out of school. I know a trillion people at the New York Times who are not wildly happy at the New York Times. I mean, they're happy to be at the New York Times, but they're not that fulfilled. They're not doing the work they dreamed about. They don't feel that they have that much control, over their lives and their careers, which is just natural in a big organization like that, where there's so many incredibly talented people kind of scurrying around. If you go and you do something that's weird and it works, and you have a collective of people that are working on it, I think that's the most rewarding thing you can possibly do in life or in journalism. And it's interesting to me now, it's so exciting that there's so many, despite the horribleness of the profession in so many ways, there's so many opportunities to do that stuff right now. And tell a little bit more about your experience in that. I mean,
So,
is that your favorite time when you were doing?
When I've been doing, I think so. In hindsight, it's my favorite time. In the moment, it sucks. I mean, it's so much work. So it's like the same for every book I've ever written. I'm like, oh, it was such a great experience. And my husband will be like, are you kidding me? Like, you were ready to, it's really hard. Launching things is really hard, but I feel like, I had this conversation as I was being recruited to join Quartz, and I had just gotten back from maternity leave to the Wall Street Journal, and I said, you don't want me. I just came back from maternity leave. I have a 6-month-old baby. I'm still pumping. Like, I am not the type of woman you want in your newsroom. And Kevin Delaney, to his credit, who's the editor-in-chief of Quartz, he said, why can't journalism startups include people like you? And I've never heard a man say something like that. I mean, it was kind of
cool.
Yeah,
That's really neat.
Yeah, he said, why can't we? And on my first day, I mean, this is like getting really intimate. I was pumping, of course, because my child was 6 months old. It was July, and someone walked in on me, and I told Kevin, and he disappeared for 10 minutes, and he comes back from the hardware store and he installs a lock on the door. I mean, that's like the editor-in-chief you want.
Yes, that's amazing.
And that's, I feel like there are these guys in the industry. What we need to do in some ways is partner with them to change the culture. And so it's really become we're trying to do what you're saying,
Right.
which is call the behavior out, because digital journalism, anyone who's been on Twitter knows it's it can feel like it's all dudes on Twitter, right? Like, it feels very masculine. And it's is this the way journalism's going? And thankfully, I have an editor-in-chief that does not want journalism to go in that way. And I think that's, I kind of, again, it's really hard for me to separate the woman hat or the mother hat from everything that I do, but that's just my approach. I know other people are able to better compartmentalize, perhaps.
I love the hero men story.
Gail, I wanted to ask you, how did you get to where you are? What was your circuitous route?
It was and I get to say this this is the point at which Betsy just dives under the chair. I've often asked if, that people invite me to talk about my great hurdles that I had to overcome as a woman, and there truly were not any, and the main reason for that was that I was one of the people that came in 1 second after people like Betsy, and Betsy in particular, filed all the suits and opened the doors. And we all walked in and made our lives of it. And the other thing that I did was I did a startup. When I got out of college, we went to Connecticut because my husband had a job in New Haven at the Register. And there were no jobs anywhere. So I went to all the little dailies and weeklies, and I said, I will cover your delegation in the state legislature for like $10 a week, or something ridiculous. And I signed up all these little papers, and then I would send them stories. And then when I got enough papers, I hired an assistant who became my partner, and that was Trish Hall. That was her incredibly stupid moment. She was working at a real newspaper, and then she came and joined me. And Trish is now the op-ed editor at the Times. And we worked like crazy. We worked for 8 years, and we had 35 papers, and they all wanted individual copy. They didn't want general stories about what was happening. So we were writing like 3, 4, 5 stories a day. And we were just working like crazy. But when we talk about it now, we look, first of all, that's how I learned to write. I mean, it just breaks down the barrier when you're writing 4 or 5 or 6 stories a day, which is a great, great, great blessing. And the other is we talked all the time about how to do it better and how to change it. And there was only the 2 of us, so we could do anything we wanted to do. And we talk still today about how much fun we had back then. It was just so much fun. And everything else I got to do, every skill that I've had, has come out of that experience. So that's what if everybody here who's starting out, I wish you a crazy startup that causes you to write for ridiculously small amounts of money, thousands of stories.
I'm happy
and then it
to
won't
offer
last
that.
forever. That would be the other part of it. It's so important.
Well,
Tell me
one
one.
thing that was interesting, Claire Crawford Mason, who is now a documentary filmmaker, and I met in 3rd grade. And we were editors of our high school paper together. And so I would tell people these stories about our Catholic school, and people would laugh and say that. Well, I finally got to write a book called Virgins, which was the story of us trying to be, trying to make a life in a time when basically Catholic girls were supposed to make novenas and make babies. And
Your
that was
Catholic
it.
school was even worse than my Catholic
Was it?
school.
It was
I
awful?
swear, yeah.
Well, and then I did the sequel, which was these characters, us thinly disguised, covering Washington in the 1970s. And Claire has still not forgiven me because my character got the Pulitzer Prize, and her character got to be a battered Navy wife. Yeah, exactly.
Well, you should give yourself the Pulitzer Prize. Gosh darn.
But the interesting thing was that it's, when I try to tell my students, take it, I didn't know I could write a novel, but I wanted to write a novel, and sometimes doing the thing that seems just crazy, and who's going to buy this? Why am I doing it? Sometimes just taking that chance and doing something new, as you were saying, can turn out to be the most fun of all.
Danielle, I love the sort of the hero man story. Do you have any of those? Did you have any male editors who ever helped or were useful?
I have. Actually, the current managing editor of the Post was very helpful. I had a career decision to make maybe about 2 years into working at the Post, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. And at the time, he wasn't managing editor yet, but he was known to be welcoming of bringing folks into his office and just taking them to lunch and talking through what worked best for them. And we did that, and he helped me kind of figure out not only where I wanted to go next, but how to get there in a way that didn't feel compromising. And I was really surprised that he was willing to give me a chance. It's not like I had made a name for myself at that time or anyone really knew me, but he felt a kinship to me and gave me an opportunity. And it's interesting, I think seeking out people like that makes a world of difference when you're at really large organizations. And I imagine it's probably the same when you're at startups or anywhere else, just finding folks who understand how this industry works and who's willing to at least give you a chance is really helpful, especially when it can be a really stressful time covering any industry.
Banking more, it seems like. I'm sorry. Banking just seems to me like, oh my God in heaven, the bankers, they're coming again. Oh God, the bankers. Can we talk a little bit more about kids and families? I mean, you may disagree with this, Caryl, but I've always thought that the family thing is the real progenitor of the massive amount of discrimination when it comes to wages, to upward mobility, that even if you've got an astonishing spouse and everything else, there's just that sense of responsibility that weighs on women that doesn't seem to always weigh on guys that are trying to work their way up. Is that fair, or is that understood?
It is, although I must say my classmate, Alan Lupo, and my soulmate for more than 40 years, we sort of did things together. And, you know, we made rules, okay, we weren't going to take jobs that were going to take us away from home for months on end. And we made deals. He had a very strong sense of smell, so he wouldn't change the diapers, but he'd do the wash and he'd do the cleaning. And it was, at the time, it was very extraordinary that, you know, that could work. But I think it worked very well because we both respected each other's careers and tried to say, let's try to apportion who gets the credit at one time and who gets the credit at another time. And one of the encouraging things is that research is showing that for the first time really in the last few years, young men are saying that they're putting having a good family life and being a good father even ahead of success. So I think that I see sort of among some of my young students, I see a mismatch. The younger women say, oh, it's impossible, we can't do it. And I'm saying it's probably, when you look at how the young men are changing, that if you try, you can do it. You shouldn't say, oh, too much, I'll step back too early because it's impossible.
Right. I think the story of men changing is part of the story that we've been talking about what's changing for women. The younger men that I see have a remarkably different attitude about the whole thing. I have to tell you one story. This is my favorite men changing story in the world. When I was on the editorial board at the Times, there was a guy named Steve Weissman on the board who was married to Elizabeth Buemiller, who is our Pentagon rep, and she's done everything. She's just been a huge superstar at the paper. But when I knew them first, Elizabeth was on the Metro desk. She was sort of just starting. And they had 2 young children. And they asked Elizabeth if she wanted to go and cover the war in Kosovo for a while, which is the kind of thing, you know, they do. They'll give you some crazy assignment, and then if you don't go crazy doing it, then they'll promote you to something else somewhere. So it wasn't going to be forever, but she said yes, she would go to Kosovo, so she went to Kosovo. And I ran into Steve in the lobby about 3 months later, and he looked like a dead person. He was and I said, oh my God, what is wrong with you, man? And he said with real tragedy in his voice, my wife's in Albania and the hamster's missing. This is the story of, you know, men. Someday I will write a book about men changing. You know, I'll call it My Wife's in Albania and the Hamster's Missing. It's my favorite story in the history of the world. And Betsy, tell me, how much time do we have? We're going to do questions.
Listen, I could sit here until midnight.
Is it time for, Janice, should we go on to questions?
We can go on for questions.
Yeah.
And I'd actually like to get up and recognize the men who have open door policies, all the men who are here. Our CEO of Reuters News, Andrew Vashpath, he's an open door CEO. In one of the busiest weeks and busiest days he ever had, he made an astonishing amount of time for me to come in and have a one-on-one meeting and talk about the McCormick scholarships, and he's giving us a major gift.
Yes. Let's hear it for writers and the men, all the men. Well, let's do questions. I think if we just get up and yell, that'll do it. Go ahead.
Hi, Gail. I think that you're right about having a family in many cases for women does limit you, and I'm not sure there's a great way to go about it, because even if you do have a helpful spouse, first of all, some women don't have a spouse, but if you do have a helpful spouse, still, there's a feeling inside that makes you want to go home to your children, and, you know, that's the way it is. You don't want to give up that time with your children and growing with them and teaching them. So by necessity, you can't really devote, 12 hours or 14 hours to work the way somebody who's less encumbered, that's not quite the right word, but
you're right.
So I think that's, but I do think there are ways that corporations, not just helpful husbands, can help. And like if a woman has to deliver a child to school in the morning, she shouldn't be compelled to work at 7:30 a.m. or feel as if she's not pulling the weight. Those kinds of things a corporation can do. And I would say that in terms of keeping parity in terms of pay for men and women, a collective bargaining contract is a great help in that regard, because in a collective bargaining contract there is a tremendous amount of transparency. The contract is there, you open it, the chart is there as to what people are being paid, and it takes out a lot of favoritism and unconscious biases.
And I've just looked at some research which shows that in Europe, when men and women take leaves, they are not regarded as, not loyal to the company or not good workers. But in the U.S. corporations, it's like the NFL, you play hurt. So if you take a leave, and 84% of leave takers are women, so when you take a leave, you find that your promotions are less, and for men or women, but of course women take most of the leaves. That can be changed with a change of attitude. It's not, that's going to cost you a lot of money. It's not going to do a lot of things. In fact, if you're a company and you encourage people to take leads when they need to, they'll be more productive, and your bottom line will be better. But it's an attitudinal change that has to come from the people in that company.
I think that on the salary issue, it's really important to have fairly ruthless contacts. So you need to know what guys in your organization are making. You need to have male mentors who are going to do some due diligence for you. I mean, I really think it's like the elephant in the room, and once you enter an organization and you figure out what other people are making, it's rare that I've met women who don't feel pretty crappy about their role in the organization as a result. So I think at the outset, we just need to find those people who are kind of our spies in the whole thing.
Yeah, and some of the research shows that women have tons of mentors, but they don't have sponsors. Mm-hmm. The sponsor is a person to go out and limb for you and take a chance, and men get them, and women get handholders. Yeah.
I think trying to figure out which people are the difference for being your mentors and being your sponsors. Because there's some folks who can offer you all the advice. There are other folks who are like, here are the people you need to know in order for you to get a reasonable raise and to move on in this company. And that's a difficult thing to try to strategize and figure out. But once you do, it means a world of difference in any organization.
Well said. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Didn't the president just sign legislation that it's now okay to, and non-federal, take up their paycheck? I just saw.
I'm sorry, speak up a little
For
bit.
federal workers, though.
For federal workers, yeah.
So this issue is now being discussed at the federal level. And then I have a question.
Oh, good.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Oh, can I just interrupt 1 second? We're being live streamed, so if all the questions could be posed at the mic for filming and for audio. Thank you. So come on up.
Come on down. Come on down.
Being half Greek, I just wanted to know if Mr. Diamond showed any remorse at all for the whole banking debacle.
Some things. I think, he was willing to say that perhaps JP Morgan should have done a better job of making sure they trained their individual workers who shouldn't have promised things or misled people about the mortgages they were signing up for. But for the most part, he kind of still blames the government for putting him in a deal that has cost the bank billions of dollars, purchasing, I think, what was it, Wachovia at the time? Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that was Wells Fargo. Purchasing Countrywide, yes. Mm-hmm. No, that was Bank of America.
Hard to keep track.
And the list keeps going, yes. Yes, it was WAMU. It was Washington Mutual, which was one of the worst run banks at the time. So he's been able to peg that on it. But it's interesting. I think I was talking to someone the other day, and they were telling me bankers in Europe are so remorseful. They're like, oh, we did it. We're sorry. We'll fire everybody. And we'll make sure that this never happens again. In this country, it's like, look, the government forced us. We didn't know what was going on. We'll pay this money. It's over. That's kind
Thank
of
you.
Sure.
Hi, there are a lot of students in the room, and so I have 2 questions, but they're kind of geared a little bit toward them. One is there one piece of advice you have in terms of looking for a job? They're getting ready to graduate here in the next few days or weeks. Secondly, how did you learn what to ask for in terms of asking for a raise? I have been in journalism for my whole life, right? And I will end up being at an institution on average about 3 years before I finally muster the courage. And when I find out that my male colleagues are making on average about $10,000 more than me. So if you've had anything that feels like a practical piece of advice of this is how you do it, or this is what you have to swallow hard and realize about the work that you're producing, or I don't know, I'm just thinking about anything you would tell maybe the students
This
on
may
those 2
have
points.
changed, but when I was wandering around more, having these discussions, women tended much more to want their superiors to say, yes, you get more money, or because to acknowledge their good work. They felt that if they forced them on it, that it wasn't an acknowledgement of what they'd done. They kept waiting for that, that sort of sense that they were being rewarded for good work that people had seen. The one thing from being an editor, I could tell you, whatever you want something, you have to ask for it. There's a vague sense on the part of people when they start out that your superiors are watching you and judging you and determining what possibilities you have and what track you should be on. None of that is true, really. They're 90% of the time just that's nothing bad. They just have other stuff to think about. They're not thinking about that at all. And if they know what you want, even if they don't give it to you, at least they know what you want. If they don't know that you want X, Y, or Z, there's virtually no chance in the entire world that they will ever give it to you, because they're just not thinking that way.
And one of the things that we discovered was that women will not ask for a raise until they absolutely know they can do the job and do everything. Men will ask, they'll see a job and they'll say, I can learn that on the job. Right. So what happens is that women's promotion tends to be slower, and they're older as they go up the ladder. And I think what women have to do is sort of, steal it up and say, this is what I can do, and as Gail says, this is what I want, and maybe also to find colleagues who will argue for you and say, hey, this good work this person is doing. But if you don't say it, you just stay there. You don't go anywhere.
So I'm actually at a point where I'm about to ask for a raise.
Oh, good, good.
And I saw that one of the smartest women I've ever met at the paper, and I was just like, how do I even go about this? She gave me very practical advice. She was like, come up with a list of stories that you think not only exemplified your best work, but also got a lot of clicks, because that's a big thing these days, online, and also got a lot of feedback. And then present this as a case of, here's what I have done for you. If you continue to invest in me and realize my potential, here's what I can do for you in the future. I will let you guys know if it works.
Send back a report,
it's one of the
please.
smartest ways and strategic ways to think about it.
I think women make the mistake of thinking that salary, as you said, is a function of what they're worth to an organization, as opposed to the reality is salary is what you're worth in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And so you're kind of worth what somebody else is willing to pay for you. Now, the problem with that thinking is that you could be like me, and every time you kind of, at the 3-year point, you're ready to ask for a raise, that's like, it's not a coincidence that that's like when I end up out the door, because once you start flirting with someone, you're kind of like, you're already halfway down that road, you're already halfway out the door. So I've been fairly lucky because I've moved around a lot, and it's gotten me a sense of the marketplace. Now I'm a little bit older in my, and I'm further along in my career, when the question of what I want is actually much harder, right? It's no longer, wow, everybody wants you, because they still, I still kind of get offers, not as regularly as when I was 27, but I get them. And, but the question is, what do I want? And that, I think, and also for the students in the room, figuring out what you want is probably the hardest question anybody can ask you. And that's at least for me right now. I feel like I've come to a place where as I get recruited, it's like, that's not really what I want, right? And the organization I'm with right now is able to almost accommodate me and that list of what I both bring as well as what I want. Also, there is a shortage of female managers, so don't sell yourself short on that front. I mean, I have a male sponsor, and when I was negotiating once for a job, I said, you know, I think they just want me because I'm a minority. And he goes, charge them for it. And then I said, and I think they might just want me because I'm the only girl, I'd be like the only girl in the room. And he goes, charge them even more for that. So it's not bad advice. For the students, did we answer that, Kelly? Do you feel like we're okay?
Actually, there's one other thing I'd like to say for students.
Yeah.
Don't feel that you have to go to a legacy paper. Don't feel like
Yeah,
your only
absolutely.
opportunities
Right.
are going to come at really huge organizations. There are so many really amazing startups right now that will utilize your skills and your talent, and you could have such an amazing foundation just starting out there or even staying there. The world of journalism is such an interesting place right now where you can be at a BuzzFeed doing amazing investigative journalism as much as you can be at maybe a Reuters or a Post or a New York Times. And those opportunities are out there for you to take advantage of them and enjoy that. It's amazing.
Oh, one other thing I just thought, this is not about women, but it's thinking about what you want and asking what you want and trying to understand what you want is very important. It's also very important to actually understand what it is your superiors want, because they won't necessarily articulate it in an honest manner. And you have to think about, like, you know, what's useful to them, you know, what really would work, what makes their lives happier and more fulfilled and more clicked and upon and so on and so forth. And when you're applying for jobs, look at, as much as possible, find out exactly what the job is about and make sure when you're pitching it, you pitch very specifically to the stuff that they're looking for, even if your own favorite thing is something else, because they don't care. It's not, they just want their own thing, and it's just a matter of getting in their heads. I'm so cynical, it's terrible. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And also be very flexible, that I've seen a piece of student work and I say, look, this is a terrific piece of work. It can be, you know, a piece for one of the new places, you know, the long form online journalism. It could be, go to a place like Frontline and pitch it. It could be a film, it could be a documentary, it could maybe even be a novel, it could be a really good piece of journalism. There's just lots of ways out there that you can take your material and turn it into something else. And now with everybody looking for content, I mean, you know, it's just, the market out there is huge, so you have to just be pretty flexible and say, you know, I didn't get this piece in the New York Times, but there's a bunch of other markets out there that this might work for.
You're absolutely right. Betsy.
One of
Ask
my
the last question.
One of my great learning experiences at the New York Times was being a pension trustee. And every 2 years, they spit out what everybody made and how long they had been making it and how long they had been there and what their gender was. And what I discovered very quickly is if you don't get it at the hiring gate, you will never catch up.
Yes.
So if
That's
all
a
of
good
you
point.
are looking at startups, don't take their first offer. Get something more, because later on, it's still going to be with you. I promise.
Betsy.
Yes.
Applause for Betsy.
You know, on that point, I was actually talking to people at the Harvard Law School the other day, and some of the women were saying, well, I don't know if I want to do law review. I might not want to do this. I might not want to do that because I don't want to be a soulless corporate drone. And one of the things that everybody on the panel, including Judge Nancy Gertner, was saying, get your credentials now. You know, nobody says you've got to be a corporate drone, but you know, if you want choices, you have to really get your credentials and hone your skills while you're young, and that you can have enough skills so that you won't wake up 20 years from now with no options. So I think that, and I'm not going to say you have to lean in, as Sheryl Sandberg says, but she has hit on something, the idea that women are taking themselves out of the serious market too early, and that's really a problem.
I think we are moving on, Janet, we're moving on to the next part of the evening. I don't know how I got to be in charge of the parts of the evening. That's so unusual for me, but you are such a great audience, and thank you so much for being here tonight and, you know, taking part in the conversation, which will continue on, but I think first Jan has some announcements to make. And
Thank you.
Oh. Thank you, panel.
Well, we want to have another round of applause for you, Gail, and to thank you for a dozen years of service on the world.
Yes.
Oh,
And to announce that Gail's colleague, Susan Shira, Assistant Managing Editor of the New York Times, has agreed to serve as a trustee and keep the New York Times legacy going.
And the Foreign
wonderful.
Affairs
And the
correspondent
Foreign
legacy
Affairs.
going, too.
Exactly, so we're very grateful for that, and grateful to Gail for carving time out of her column deadlines to pull us together tonight. And we have Kelly Crow, our trustee and McCormick Scholarship winner. She and Mitra were classmates, class of 2000. Kelly's going to come up and tell you a story.
Taking the mic from Gail Collins, which is a moment. Thank you so much. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming, and I just wanted to pitch you a little bit. I've started out as the editor of my high school newspaper, in the Rough Draft, RUFF, because it's nice and punny, in Edmond, Oklahoma. And I worked for my local paper, the Edmond Evening Sun, back when papers came out in the afternoons, because that's when news, happens. And I have probably pitched hundreds, if not thousands, of stories since then. But tonight I'm pitching you because I'm such a beneficiary of this fund that I can't even begin to tell you. I applied to Columbia. It was the only graduate school I applied to. I thought, I'm in Oklahoma, I'm getting a little bored, my stuff's not getting edited. I could either write for the Tulsa World or maybe shoot for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, or maybe, just maybe, I could make it in New York if I could get to Columbia. And I made a deal with my parents where I agreed to stay home during college. I worked 35 hours a week and took 15 hours, and they saved up, and so then by the time we graduated, they had the tuition money, most of it, but they didn't have any money for me to actually live on or get coffee on or order pizza on, like in my year here. So I started applying to scholarships left and right because honestly, they had the money for the tuition, but if I couldn't have money to live on, it wasn't going to be possible for me to be here. And so the day that I won the scholarship was I remember, I'm still getting choked up now, all these years ago. It's crazy. I think I cried like a baby because it made all of this possible, and I just think that I would encourage you all, when you have a moment, to Google Network for Good and the McCormick Fund, like I have done here, if I can pull it up. Here we go. You will see this lovely mobile app, which has been my baby for the last few weeks. Network for Good is a great page for helping people to literally just click and donate now. And so I can tell you that, without the generosity of people who came and made it possible for me to move to New York, I don't think I would be here 14 years later, or certainly it would have come from a much harder route. But, I was 22 when I moved here. I didn't know a soul. I slept on, I think I slept on the floor of a playroom of one of the professors here who ran the international program and knew my editor from Oklahoma, of all random Southern things. And being here in Columbia really opened doors for me because suddenly I had someone to vouch for me, right? So then I started working, I exchanged my $7 a week job at the paper for a $600 a week job at the New York Times under contract for the city desk. And again, Connie Rosenblum gave me a chance back in a time when I don't know if other editors at the Times would have given a 23-year-old a chance, but they did. And I ended up being at that paper for about 4 years and got to be involved with covering 9/11, which what other paper, besides the Journal could you want to be at, for a story like that? It was a huge opportunity for me and a huge rite of passage, and I'll always be really grateful for that Mary Tyler Moore phase of my youth. And then I've been at the Journal since 2005, and it's this paper. I have extra pages stitched into my passport because of this paper. I love it so much, and they've sent me around the world. I've been to Bogota, I've been to Beijing.
I still have Africa, so my editor will probably get pitches from Africa one of these days. India and back again. I cover the art market for us, so I have a Rolodex full of billionaires and often the bankers, and I trade those numbers on occasion. They want money, I want Monet, so it works out. But in any case, I would just really encourage you both to mentor as best you can the younger women reporters on your newsrooms. I think I was talking earlier that most of the mentoring I've had has come from women at the amazing papers that I've worked for, but also this fund. I mean, the women here, Joan O'Sullivan and Jan, and I mean, I think the people who have come through this program form a real cadre of women who I think are ostensibly power brokers in the field. And so as best you can, get to know it. If you want to get involved, there's always going to be sort of ways in which we can need you and use you. And please encourage, if you have matching grant programs at your institutions, or if you have sort of major editors who you think have a heart for younger women reporters. I just think 60 years is a long time for this fund to exist, and we sort of stand on those shoulders, and I'm really honored to be here. So click and donate, and tell your people to as well, and stay around and meet our girls if they're still here, and help them get them jobs. Okay. Thank you. Thanks our panelists.
Thank you. Terrific moderating job.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just doing a reference check for two people. No. It's going to work. And the other one is he starts Monday too. I was kidding. I will. I was just worried that we weren't going to pay attention to keeping my numbers. Oh, well, that's so I'm really happy. I'm like, I couldn't hear things take over the shirt. I was upset about it. I feel like really, I my internet. Really? Yeah. Well, I'll let them know that I should. Now I just know that I I need a brand new one here. Hey, here's the high finger. That is really pretty. Can you get that last one? It's where our soul belongs. We're actually getting married in here. Oh, thank you. They left it. 60 more years. 60 more years. Yes. Wonderful.